Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take some time today to present you with another word of encouragement. Now, as we continue watching things heating up between Israel and Iran, I should take a moment to remind you that the leaders of Iran have repeatedly promised that they're planning to wipe Israel from the face of the map. And while it's true that Iran has been funding more than a dozen proxy terror groups in their war against Israel, it's also true that they directly attacked Israel last year on April the 13th as well as October the 1st in their ongoing attempt to finish what Haman started back in 474 BC. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with this man named Haman, it'll help you to know that Haman was an Agagite who was believed to be a descendant of Agag, the king of the Amalekites. Now, the Amalekites, these were the first enemies to attack Israel after the Hebrew slaves left the land of Egypt. And not only that, but then it was later during the 5th century BC when Haman the Agagite, he used his influence to convince the king of Persia that they needed to annihilate all of the Jews. We find the historic account of this situation in the book of Esther, where we learn that Haman sought to destroy all of the Jews who were living throughout the whole kingdom of Persia. And with this as his goal, they cast lots, which in Hebrew is called Purim. And after they cast Purim, or lots, it was determined then that the Jews would be annihilated on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Now, you might be interested to know that this Thursday is the 13th day of Adar. And it's for this reason that the children of Israel, they're preparing to begin their annual celebration of Purim. And as we consider this 3-day celebration, which commemorates the day when Haman tried to exterminate the Jews, well, we can rejoice in knowing that the Lord was the one who orchestrated the salvation of the Jews by empowering a young Jewish girl named Esther, who became the queen of Persia. In order to understand God's providential plan, let's take a moment to consider Haman's evil plot. It's actually found in Esther chapter 3. Here we learn that Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work to bring it into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money and the people are given to you to do with them as seems good to you." Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and the decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all the people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it is written, and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people that they should be ready for that day. That's right, according to this historic account, the king of Persia issued a royal decree which provided the people of Persia with the legal right and even encouraging them to destroy, kill, and annihilate all of the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, and that this would be done in one day on the 13th day of the 12th month. Now, just to be clear, this extermination of the Jews was supposed to take place throughout the entire kingdom of Persia nearly 2,500 years ago. And listen, this would have included the Jews who returned to Israel after the Babylonian captivity. And while it's true that Haman was preparing to celebrate the extermination of the Jews on the 13th day of Adar, it's also true that his genocidal plans were thwarted by a young Jewish girl named Esther. You see, it was Esther who was providentially placed in the palace of King Ahasuerus. And it was Esther who became the queen of Persia after catching the eye of the king. And it was Esther who risked her life by revealing her Jewish lineage to the king, after that decree had already been given. And all of this according to the encouragement of her adoptive father, Mordecai, who assured her that the God of Israel was going to use her to save the Jews. We actually find this in Esther chapter 4, where Mordecai encouraged Esther to use her position as queen in order to influence the king of Persia. And in response, Esther shared her concerns by informing Mordecai that anyone who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called will be put to death unless he holds out the golden scepter that he may live. And seeing how Esther hadn't been called to go in to see the king for at least 30 days, well, she was sure that she probably wouldn't survive this uninvited meeting. Well, in response to that, Mordecai assured her that, this was her time to trust in the Lord for the deliverance of Israel. Here's how he put it in Esther chapter 4. It's verse 13 where Mordecai declares, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" That's right, it was Queen Esther who was providentially placed in the king's palace so that she could be used to secure the salvation of her people. And to sum up the entire story, it'll help you to know that Queen Esther, she went into the king and he extended the scepter and she asked the king to then set up a feast for him and for Haman. And then together after a few feasts, Esther informed the king that there was an evil plot against her to kill her and her people. And after revealing to the king her Jewish lineage, Haman then ended up being the one hanged from his own gallows. The king of Persia then ordered the Jews to go ahead and protect themselves on the 13th day of Adar. And it was at that point in time when the Lord delivered the Jews from the Persians who tried to exterminate them. It's actually found in Esther chapter 9, where we read, "In the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed. On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm. And no one could withstand them, because fear of them fell upon all people, and all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and all those doing the king's work helped the Jews because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai became increasingly prominent. Thus the Jews defeated all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, with slaughter and destruction, and did what they pleased with those who hated them." Now, as we consider the way in which the Lord enabled the Jews to defeat their enemies throughout the entire kingdom of Persia, the enemies of Israel today will do well to realize that the God of Israel is the one who is currently reestablishing the Jews there in the land of their inheritance. And as the children of Israel prepare to celebrate Purim, starting this Thursday, the people of Persia, which is now known as Iran, they'll do well to revisit this story of Haman and how he ended. Those who serve as the proxy terror groups of Iran should also take some time to realize that the God of Israel used a young Jewish girl named Esther to deliver the descendants of Israel from the genocidal desires of Haman. And so just imagine what he could accomplish with the Israel Defense Force today. In light of these things, I believe that we'd all do well to celebrate Purim, especially as we consider how Esther and Mordecai were used to protect the bloodline from which our Messiah was born. And with that being the case, I encourage every Christian to see the celebration of Purim as an opportunity to preach the good news that salvation is received by faith in our Savior, Jesus Christ. And much like Esther, listen, this is the time for believers to take a stand against the Hamans of this world, because it's for such a time as this that we've been called to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.